Hotel, we're on page 30. And in the art scroll, whoops.
Did we do Mara?
No, I didn't do more. I have nothing particular to say about it. In the art scroll, we're on page 44. In every generation, a person is obligated to see himself as if he left from Egypt. This is what I've been telling you in the name of Rabbi Bullman. It's not enough just to tell the story. You have to see yourself as you're having undergone that exodus. Now, the Haggadah quotes two verses, and it'd be worthwhile to analyze the difference between them. One verse is, "You shall tell your son on that day, saying, for the sake of this, Hashem did for me when I left Egypt." We've seen this verse before. We saw it in the four sons. But then the paragraph goes on, not only our ancestors did Hashem redeem, but even us he redeemed with them, as it says, and he took us out of there in order to bring us to the land that he swore to our ancestors. Now, why isn't that the same thing twice? What do I need two verses for?
One is the Bavor Zeh.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what exactly is the this? What's it's going back on? The matzah, the maror. And the other one is just talking about the actual act of God, that he took us out.
Okay, good. Yes, the first one has the famous phrase, for the sake of this, and this is demonstrative, and we spoke about that at the beginning of the Haggadah, and the second one doesn't mention that. Good. That's true. That is the difference between them. There's also a contrast in the grammar of the two sentences, which would impact your experience in an important way. You see the difference?
Present versus past.
I think both of them are past tense. They both speak about what happened in the past. He did for me. He took us out.
When he took me out. Yasa Hashem Li. I guess, right, that is past.
You know, you can have a 4-year college education and get through the whole thing without ever having learned to read. Read carefully. Well, the first verse is in the singular, and the second is in the plural. The first says what he did for me, and the second one says what he did for us. Hallel points this out. And this refers to the dual existence of a Jew, that on the one hand, he is an individual, he has an individual divine significance that he carries with him on his own. On the other hand, he's a member of the national collective and plays a role vis-a-vis that collective, and that also defines a dimension in which his identity is expressed. He has a two-dimensional identity. So he took me out, I personally, and he took us out, us being the contemporary stage of the Jewish people. That opens up a whole subject, which I'm not going to do today. I've done it before. It's recorded in various places. The two different ways that a person has to look at his function in the world and how he relates to Kodesh Baruch Hu. And I have said that without the collective dimension, that you can't be connected. That's true. But it doesn't follow from that that's the only connection. And there are sources in the Gemara and other places which paint the Jew as an individual having an impact on the world, in addition to the role he plays in the collective. My model for this is, a rough model is the genetics of the cell. On the one hand, they used to think that there were about 20 different cell types. Oh, but as I have told you many times, everything's much more complicated than it seems to be. Now they're talking about 3,000 different cell types. And using AI to figure out how to classify them. Good luck with that. So they have different sizes, different shapes, different structures. Different parts of the DNA are active in different cell types. Therefore, they play different roles in the functioning of the body. But they all have the same DNA. If you had up a clone from any one of them, you would be able to, you have to work with the masking of DNA, but you'd be able to generate a whole person from it, from the DNA in any cell. So on the one hand, it carries the identity of the whole, and on the other hand, it plays a differentiated part. So you have an echo in biology for this idea that we have here as a spiritual reality. Now, come to the last two paragraphs of the, I shouldn't have said that, because there are two paragraphs of the Hallel and two paragraphs of the Haggadah to finish the first section of the Haggadah. The next paragraph starts with the word therefore. And when you will, Mr. Hashem, someday learn Gemara, especially when you learn Tosfos, every time there's a therefore, there's an if, or if so, Tosfos is on the spot. What was the way in which the previous thing affects this? If the previous thing hadn't been there, would you have been able to say this some other way? And Tosfos always looks for the connections between the passages. We have to understand that this next paragraph, which starts with therefore, tells me some consequence of the previous paragraph, and we should look to see whether you need that previous paragraph to get to this one. When you say therefore, you could be saying two different things, or perhaps a combination. One is the previous is what produces the consequence. The other is that without the previous, this consequence wouldn't have come into being. They aren't the same. The fact that, in this case, A caused B, doesn't mean that had A been absent, B wouldn't have happened. Think of a firing squad. 10 people have their rifles aimed at the person to be executed. They don't all fire simultaneously. As a matter of fact, one bullet hits him and kills him. If that bullet hadn't killed him, he wouldn't have survived. Another bullet would have hit him and killed him. So this bullet that actually caused him to die, but without this bullet, he also would have died. So not always, when you say that A caused B, is it true that without A, B wouldn't have happened. Sometimes it's true, and sometimes it isn't true. So let's take a look here. This paragraph that we just finished says that we should regard ourselves as if we went out of Egypt. Now it says, therefore, we are obligated to praise or to give thanks, and then several different words for praising, to the one who did for our ancestors and for us all of these miracles. Took us out of Egypt, etc., etc., etc. So it sounds like it's because we are regarding ourselves as the ones who actually experienced the Exodus. That's why we are obligated to give thanks and praise. And it could carry the implication that if we didn't see ourselves that way, then we wouldn't have had that obligation. And of course, this comes at this point in the Haggadah, not earlier, when we were only talking about reciting history, even though we said that we were reliving it, that's what we said. But here's where the Haggadah actually expresses it. Now, there is a set of circumstances that apply to the Haggadah and to other things. That what I'm going to tell you now, I heard from Rabbi Moshe Meiselman, who's one of the people who taught me a great deal of what I know. And it cuts deep, but also shows how different items which are in the same vicinity can be related in a very systematic way. You may have heard the famous rabbinic statement that when the Kodesh split the sea and we passed over and the Egyptians tried to pursue us and they were drowned, the angels wanted to say God's praises, and Kodesh Baruch Hu said to the angels, the works of my hands, the Egyptians, are drowning, and you want to praise me? And with that, he silenced them, and they couldn't say praise. That's a very famous thing, especially in certain political circles. But as a matter of fact, simultaneously, we did say praise. And that praise is recorded in the Torah, as Yosher Moshe. And we say it every morning. So the first question we should ask is, how is it that we could say praise and they couldn't? And then, in later generations, on the holiday of Passover, we say Hallel. But we don't say it equally every day. On the first day, or if you're unlucky enough to live outside the land of Israel in the first 2 days, you say Hallel with all of the entire text. And if you have a Sephardi tradition, you say it with a blessing. The rest of the days, you don't say the whole text. There are 2 paragraphs of which half are skipped. And if you're from a Sephardi tradition, you don't say the blessing. And the status is different. When you say the whole thing, it's a mitzvah. And when you don't say the whole thing, it's only a custom. Why is that? Only the first day, not the rest of the days. There are several answers. But one of the answers is this. Well, on the 7th day of Pesach, which happens to be the same date as the splitting of the sea, just as Hashem said to the angels, don't praise me, so we too can't praise. Not on the same level, not with the same completeness. That's why we reduce the status of Hallel to just a custom. And then you can't have the intermediary days be given more recognition than the last day, which is a full holiday. So all the intermediary days also, you only say what's called half Hallel. So now we have a third perspective. We can't say whole Hallel on the 7th day of Pesach because of the creatures of my hands are drowning in the sea. So we at the event did say. The angels at the event didn't say. And we, later generations, also can't say. What exactly is going on? And our commentators will talk about this. Rabbi Meiselman added another thought. On the first night of Pesach, when we said that we're at the Seder, we were celebrating the events that took place, including the death of all the Egyptian firstborn. And we do say the whole Hallel. Why is that? Why don't we, like the 7th day of Pesach, where the Egyptians drowned in the sea, and we reduce Hallel to half Hallel to a custom, why not on the night of the first day, when the Egyptians were being struck with the plague of the firstborn, also reduce our Hallel to half Hallel? For the same reason. So Rabbi Meiselman explains it as follows. Hallel carries with it 2 dimensions, but not both of them are always applicable. One dimension of Hallel is praise, and the other dimension of Hallel is an expression of gratitude. Praise can be available to anyone at any time. Gratitude is personal. If you were benefited by the event, then you can express gratitude. If not, not. So, at the crossing of the sea, the angels could praise, the Jews could both praise and give gratitude. God says to the angels, I don't want your praise because the creatures of my hands are drowning in the sea. It means you're praising me when I'm in a condition in which not everything's good for me, so to speak. The Jews, however, are expressing gratitude. That's always appropriate. That's always appropriate. So they say the whole Hallel because they had that element of gratitude, and of course, the Hallel is also praise, but that element of gratitude justifies their saying the Hallel. In later generations, the people who are saying Hallel, the Jews who are saying Hallel, weren't there. Since they weren't there, they can't express that gratitude. And so, just like the angels, they can't say the whole Hallel. Now, what about the night of the Seder? Well, the answer is the previous paragraph we just read. That paragraph says, on the night of the Seder, we have to see ourselves that we went out of Egypt. So then, we are direct recipients of the Exodus. And therefore, we do have the ability to express gratitude. And therefore, we can say the whole Hallel. I think this is a really beautiful analysis. And I found a little hint to it, which I showed to Rabbi Mazen, and he was very pleased to see it. The Song of the Sea starts the Shin Yes Yud Resh of Shir appears 3 times there. And if you look in the Aramaic translation by Onkelos, you find the following. As Yoshir he translates as Shabach. Shabach means to praise. As a Shira Hazos, Tushbachta, praise. But when it says Shira, it says Ashabach V'udi, I will praise and give thanks. Now I have asked many people, why would it be that you have the same root 3 times in the space of 10 words, and Onkelos doesn't translate it the same way? I didn't find anybody who had noticed it, but the Art Scroll volume that's dedicated to Onkelos does notice it, but doesn't really have an adequate answer for it. I think it's very remarkable. But what Onkelos at least is including is that Hallel is praise, Shira is praise, and it has an aspect of thanksgiving.
Where was this translation? Was in
Onkelos?
Onkelos in where?
This is a verse in the Torah.
Okay.
And right on that verse in the Torah, you can see it there.
The verse of?
B'shalach. Maybe it's here. Never mind. I'll find it here.
I was writing stuff down, so.
Yeah, okay. No problem. It's right here. Here we are. This is... Oh, here it is. Yeah. Exodus 14:30. That's where it starts. 14:30. You can read it there. So this lefichach here is very important. Because we regard ourselves, we see ourselves that we went out, therefore we are obligated to give praise. And of course the praise is Hallel. It's the Hallel we're talking about. So with Rabbi Manzelman's explanation, we understand what the leficha. Without that, we'd have to say, since we are later generations, just like we don't say the whole Hallel on the 7th of Pesach, we wouldn't be able to say the whole Hallel at the Seder either.
We don't say the full Hallel on the I thought you said the whole Hamoed. We don't say it. It was only the 7th day that we don't say it.
Well, The seventh day is the reason why we don't say it.
Okay.
But then the intermediary days can't be superior to the seventh day, which is a whole holiday.
Okay.
So it becomes reduced on all the intermediary days. Then you're left only with the first day.
Okay.
Unlike Sukkot, for example, where you say the whole Hallel every day.
Okay.
As I said, this is not the only explanation, but it's the one that I want to share with you.
This is the beginning of Oz Yashir?
Mm-hmm. That's those very words. So you see the unclus there? Were you looking in the Seder or are you looking
I'm
in
just in the Seder.
No, but you don't have unclus there.
So you need it to look at the actual unclus. Okay.
Yeah, you don't have it there. Okay, then come the first two paragraphs of Hallel, and then comes a blessing ending the first section of the Haggadah, and then comes the meal. And after that, we finish the rest of Hallel. So, a double question arises. First of all, you're not really allowed to interrupt Hallel. Even if you were saying Hallel without a blessing, you can't interrupt it. Here we're saying the whole thing with a kind of blessing. We're not saying the normal blessing, was with a kind of blessing. How come you're allowed to interrupt it? And if you're going to interrupt it, how do you choose where to interrupt it? So the answer to the second question is, if you look at the content of the first two paragraphs of Hallel, then Hallel, of course, is Psalms 113 through 118. They are both about the past. What happened to what the Kodesh Baruch Hu did for us, basically at the time of the Exodus from Egypt. The rest of Hallel is about God's continuing providence over the Jewish people and foreshadowing the events of the future. So it's a very natural place to break, especially since the first part of the Seder is dedicated to reliving the past transition from slavery to freedom that took place in the Exodus from Egypt. So this is a natural place to break. Let me say that, let's go through the last blessing that's after it, and then I'll go back to these two paragraphs and we'll give as much time as we have. So, this is the one that ends the first section of the Haggadah. Now, the translation's at the bottom here. Okay. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, King of the universe, who has redeemed us and redeemed our ancestors. There you are, us and our ancestors. This is all based on the fact that we personally underwent it from Egypt. And he enabled us to reach this night, to eat on this night. Now we say matzah morah. At the time of the temple, they would have said Pesach matzah morah. To eat those things. So he eating, nothing. Oh, wow. Giving thanks to God that he got us to this night for supper. Obviously not. We're reliving what happened to them. And now we say, we're petitioning Hashem. He should enable us to reach holidays, two different words for holidays, which we explained when we talked about the Kiddush. Other ones that are coming to greet us in peace, in shalom, rejoicing in the building of your city, and also another word for rejoicing, in your service. And we will eat there from the sacrifices, the various types of sacrifices, and in particular the Paschal sacrifice, whose blood will be presented on the wall of the altar for favor, that you will receive in favor, and we will praise you with a new shir on concerning our redemption and the salvation of our souls, and then we close the blessing. So it's not enough to acknowledge where we are. We see where we are as incomplete and pointing towards a future in which the completeness will be achieved. In other words, you're caught between the past and the future. I don't know if I told you this story, but when I was first exploring traditional Judaism, I met a person who's the nephew of my Rabbi, Avraham Horowitz, so Raha. And he once told me, he was a real Chassidish, he once told me, my goal in life is that my children should look like my parents. I said, really? That's your goal in life? I mean, you're hoping the clothes styles won't change? He said, no, that's not exactly what I mean. He said, there's a chain of tradition going back to Abraham and stretching forward to the Messiah. I don't want to be a broken link. So I thought, here's a man who lives his daily life in the midst of a 3,000-year-old and future history. That's enormous. That's enormous. Meaning, to a large extent, is a matter of connections, interactions, implications, consequences. What led up to this event? And what differences in your life is this event going to make for the future? The more that led up to it and the more differences make in the future, the more meaningful the event is. That's one of the ways of explaining what meaning is. If you think about that definition and apply it to things that happen to your life, you'll see that I think it's quite accurate. So here, if you're living with 3,000 years of history, and so then that's going to give you an enormous amount of meaning. So that's why, in part, we don't just give recognition to the past, which we have been reciting and reliving, but we project it to the future as well. Now, it says here, we will praise you with a new shir. Actually, 4 paragraphs ago, it said the same thing. If you look back to the paragraph that began, therefore, we are obligated to praise Hashem, the one who did all these things to our ancestors and for us, took us out of Egypt to freedom, from groaning to joy, from mourning to holiday, from darkness to light, to great light, from subjugation to redemption, and we will say before him, Shira Chadash, new Shira. So, it says at the end of this paragraph, and it says at the end of the bracha, 3 paragraphs later. Now, quiz time. Did you notice the difference between them?
Shira Hadasha.
Versus
Versus masculine.
Right. Shira is feminine, and shir is masculine. Ha! That's not trivial! Nothing in Jewish text is trivial. And the one difference that they say is this. If you're talking about redemption, if you're talking about salvation, if you're talking about having been in a very bad condition and exited that very bad condition, women undergo that, but they undergo it repeatedly in birth. Birth is difficult and it's painful, and then gigantic joy because you have the child. But often there's going to be another pregnancy and another birth and another transition of great pain, suffering, and then joy. So, like they used to say in my time, and this goes back about 120 years because I'm very old, the pessimist sees the tunnel, and the optimist sees the light at the end of the tunnel, and the realist sees the light at the end of the tunnel and the next tunnel, which I think is quite profound. And for a woman, there's going to be another tunnel, but not for a man. So a man can experience a total salvation, and it's over. He's now in a new permanent condition. And that's why the first one talks about shira, which would mean a temporary respite or a step in the right direction, but with more that needs to be done. And the last one talks about a final. That's why it talks about the coming of the Messiah. The end of the blessing talks about the coming of the Messiah. First one doesn't talk about that. It talks about our condition now. So that fits very well, I think. Okay, let's take a look at the two paragraphs from Hallel. The very first words, praise Hashem, praise, O you servants of Hashem. Praise Hashem's name. Now let's see. How are we to understand you servants of Hashem? Is this a limiting factor? Listen, there are a lot of people around, and some are and some aren't, and we're only talking to those who are. Or are we thinking of it in a looser, more inclusive way? Well, we all serve Hashem sometimes, and we all hope to, and maybe that's our official goal in life, and that would include everybody. I think you could probably take it both ways, but there are those who take it exclusively. That praise of Hashem belongs specifically to those who are His servants, who can qualify as servants of Hashem. And I want to tell you something here because it's a favorite of mine in philosophy. I heard this from Rabbi Donnie Deutsch, who's in Chicago, and was together with him at a summer camp for Jewish students 43 years ago. I said this over in his name at least 50 times, maybe 100 times. Is praise subjective or objective? When I say something is great, wonderful, am I just expressing my feelings towards it? Or am I saying something about it that's objective? I think if you ask the question that way, almost everyone will say that it's subjective. You praise what impresses you, and other people praise what impresses them. But he said it's a mistake, and so did John Stuart Mill. And I'll give you an example of why it's a mistake. If praise is just expressing my feelings, there's no sense in which the praise could be wrong. Because that's how I feel. I'm expressing how I feel. Well, consider the following case. You meet somebody who spent his whole life in the center of Australia, in the desert, and you're talking, and you mention to him basketball, and he says, "What's that?" You say, "You don't know what basketball is? Let me show you something." So you find out it was a basketball game, and you buy tickets, you go down, and you're sitting in the stands waiting for the game to begin, and the players are warming up. And he's watching, fascinated. Suddenly he grabs your arm and he says, "Did you see that? Did you just see that unbelievable thing? He jumped into the air, and while he was in the air, he threw the ball into the hoop. Unbelievable. What a great shot." It was a jump shot from the foul line. Right? So what did he say to him? He said, "Listen, calm down, calm down. Lots of high school kids can do that. It's not a great shot. It's a very common shot. Maybe during the game you'll see 2 or 3 great shots, but that wasn't a great shot. It wasn't a great shot. You said it was a great shot? You're wrong. It wasn't a great shot. Because great, by definition, can't be common, ordinary, and easy." Oh, so that means sometimes when you praise something, it could be wrong. Then it isn't just a question of how you feel. He felt excited and inspired by it. And we tell him, so what? Calling it great is a mistake. I don't care how you felt. Well, the question then becomes, how do you judge whose reaction to something, which leads to praise, is more reliable or less reliable, if there is something really objectively correct here? And the first answer is simply the way you would do with anything else. There are people, like opera critics. They earn their living going to a performance of an opera and then writing it up and analyzing it and judging it. If you thought praise was subjective, why would you care? Why would anybody pay him to write it up and publish it? Those were his feelings when he went. So what? Maybe I'll have different feelings when I go. No, because he's studied operas. He's heard hundreds of operas, and he can discern what's a really good performance and what isn't, what the strengths and weaknesses of a performance are. His ear is better than ours. So he has a much better judgment as to what's good and what's bad about the opera and the overall value of the opera. So praise is something which is objective. If praise is objective, and we're talking about praising Hashem, not everybody's words with which he will express his conception of God's greatness will be equally accurate, equally appropriate. those people who are real Abdei Hashem, have the closest relationship with Hashem, their words are going to be the words that are most appropriate for praising Hashem. And this is reflected in the fact that in the prayers, the vast majority of the words that we use come from the Tanakh, which means they come from prophecy, which means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu dictated the words to them, or there's some difference of opinion about this. Some say that some of the writings in the Tanakh aren't dictated words. Not everybody, but there are some who say some aren't dictated. But it's a kind of divine inspiration which leads them to put it into their words. And their words, just like you would have to pay very careful attention to Shakespeare's words, even though he wasn't getting prophecy from God or divine inspiration. So too, these words are going to be very precious words. And we who don't have that inspiration directly, our prayers come from those words. The Rabbi makes this point, but quoting a Gemara, how can we say the words we say? It says, if it hadn't been for the fact that a prophet said the words and the men of the Great Assembly commanded us to say the words, we wouldn't be able to use them. Even the fact that the prophet wrote them wouldn't be enough, because they're his words. Who says, I can use them? You need great people to make that judgment. And I think this is reflected also in the fact that when we say, as we do over and over again, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvakos, holy, 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 3 times, every time we say it, we say, just as the angels say. Because in the book of Isaiah, it's a quotation of what he heard the angels saying. Why am I citing that every time? Because I couldn't say it on my own. I wouldn't be able to author something like that. I couldn't take responsibility for something like that. Now, they're very close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They perceive him in a much greater way than we do. And therefore their words, I can use their words on the basis of their understanding.
They have to ask each other permission too, right?
No, they have to ask to go through the performance of saying it. It's like having a conductor to an orchestra. He picks up the baton, they're all ready, and he goes, bang! And then they play, right? He's not playing the words, they're playing the instruments, but in order for it to be a coordinated performance, and that, by the way, you're touching on something which isn't obvious at all, because the introduction to Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh says they do with sweet voice, and they give each one gives permission to the other one, and they say all together, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Then before the next verse, you say, there's a great noise. Great noise. Ah, what's that? Before it was sweet and organized, everything else. Now it's a great noise. You know what the Ramchal says about that? I think this is in the Adi Mamarom. It says that great noise is the noise of exile. When you're in exile, things aren't organized and sweet and integrated and beautiful in that way. They aren't. And that verse comes from Ezekiel, who lived in Babylon in exile. So the experience is a entirely different experience. And there, in introducing the second verse, it says, these angels rise up to be parallel to those angels. I asked my son about this. My oldest son knows a great deal about these things. And he said, could be that they're out of place. They don't belong there. But because of exile, things aren't ordered in the way that they should be ordered. And that's why there's a great noise. And then when you hear that, you think, oh, so introducing Kodesh, Kodesh, Kodesh doesn't say great noise. And here it does. That's important. Like I keep telling you and keep shouting at you, it's important. These things carry very deep meaning. Anyway, so that's the idea of starting off with those who serve Hashem. They're going to give praise, and then we will be able to take from their praise something that we could use. May the name of Hashem be blessed from now to forever. And then it says, from the rising of the sun to its setting, Hashem's name is praised. Now here's a trick question. The previous one said, from now and forever. And now it says, from the rising of the sun to the setting. Is that daytime? Sounds like it. But then you just said it's going to be forever. So what addition could there be in saying every daytime? trick answer is the words in the text don't have to mean daytime. What else could they mean? From the rising of the sun to its setting.
Gracious, like light, goodness, not non-exile.
Instead of time, it could be,
Location, place.
space. From the east to the west. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So the first one is for all time, and the second one is for all place. Hello, Einstein. Space-time. And by the way, olam means both space and time. Olam, more or less, means forever, and olam is a word for the world, which is the entirety of the physical world. Maybe more in addition, but it certainly includes space. To have one word for both, I think, is quite interesting. I gave a hint there, I'll just fill it out. Some say, like Maimonides and others, Olam does not mean forever. Sorry if that's the way you always translated it, but it doesn't mean forever. And the proof is that there's another phrase, La'olam va'ed. The va'ed has to do something that you didn't have before. If La'olam already meant forever, va'ed wouldn't be doing anything. He says, no, La'olam va'ed means forever. La'olam means for a specified period of time. This justifies a famous statement in Chazal. A Jewish slave, male slave, supposed to serve for 6 years and then go out. If he wants to stay, he could stay, and he only stays until the Jubilee, however long that is. And the verse says, "Va'avado la'olam." He should serve his master la'olam. So if you translate forever, you find it difficult to be told afterwards, forever up until the Jubilee, and then he can go out. That's not forever. And so the Chazals make the remark, "La'olamo shel yovel," for the world of the Jubilee. If you don't know what's going on, you think, what are they talking about? La'olam is forever. The world of the Jubilee. You're playing with the words? Not at all. Not at all, because La'olam doesn't mean forever. La'olam va'ed means forever. It doesn't say va'ed. La'olam means for some specified period of time, and then the text has to tell you what specified period of time is. And the Rashba in the Tshuva says, it says he should serve him forever. Does that mean the master's going to live forever? Probably not, right? So La'olam can't mean forever. Can't mean forever. Then the text has to tell you, when the time is up. This happens so many times. When you hear a rabbinic comment, especially from the Talmudic era, it seems absolutely arbitrary, absolutely off base. Hold on to them. Hold on to your surprise. And I can guarantee you'll have, throughout your life, you'll have very, very pleasant surprises when you stumble across, through divine providence, what the explanation is. This has happened to me at least 50 times, maybe 100 times, when I've had these questions about how the words work, and then come across explanations which are really quite accurate, clear and explanatory, and then the question is answered.
I'm a little lost.
Okay.
So the paragraph we just went, which starts with Hallel, praise you servants. You said that was part of Hallel?
Yes. This is the beginning of Psalm 113. Hallel is Psalms 113 through 118.
Okay. Oh, I see. So this is the beginning of, and then we have a break for the matzah and stuff. Okay.
Oh, I have to explain that. Yeah, almost, that's right. So now, how do you have a break altogether? Well, if what we're doing is reliving the experience of the Exodus, the meal was part of the experience. So we start off setting up the general historical perspective, and we give praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the events that happened in the past, and then we act out the events that happened in the past by having our own Seder, which is parallel to the Seder that they had. It's not an interruption. It's a continuation of the same performance of reliving the Exodus. The performance here isn't Hallel. Hallel is part of the performance of reliving the Exodus. That's what justifies the interruption, or one way to explain what justifies the interruption. I'll just tell you the last verse. I won't. It takes like 20 minutes to explain it. But I'll do the headline and I'll quit. It's very, very important. So it says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is great and high in the heavens, and he lowers himself. Usually the translations don't explain it that way, but they should. Condescendeth. It makes it emotional. He condescends to look down. The mashpili in Hebrew means to lower himself, to look at the heavens and the earth. God doesn't live in heaven. God's the creator of everything, including heaven. And he has to undergo a descent to interact with and inspect even the heavens. Okay, so he pictures him as above and beyond, transcendent, and now coming to interact with the creation. What does he do when he does that? Well, he raises the poor from the trash heaps, the destitute from the trash heaps, from the dirt, and the destitute from the trash heaps, and he places him together with the philanthropists. Sometimes they translate as princes, but then the div in Hebrew is a philanthropist. He enables a woman who's barren to become a joyful mother of children. And the question is this: how are we picturing HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the position of greatest transcendence doing this? What is he doing here? He's providing for the most unfortunate people in the social strata, the poor and the childless. Why are they chosen? There are other unfortunate people as well. And why is he pictured as doing that? Well, there's a Gemara that says there are 4 types of people who, the Gemara says, Nechshavim Kames, but I would translate they aren't fully alive. And they are the poor, the blind, the childless, and the person who has taras. Those 4 are as if they aren't fully alive. And the explanation is this: all 4 have a handicap in performing loving kindness. 2 have a handicap of lack of resources, and 2 have a handicap of lack of contact with those who need their help. The poor person can help with friendship, and he can help with advice, but like the great snowstorm there was in New York, how many years ago, he can't put up 25 people from the airport in his house. Not if he's living in a 3-room house, and he's got 6 children. He just can't do it. Can't go with his SUV to pick them up and bring them to his house either. So he has a handicap in doing chesed. A blind person is greatly dependent upon others, and there are many things that he can't do. Can't give you a lift to the bus stop, and he can't help you choose colors to decorate your living room, and there are lots of things he can't do. Children call out in parents an outpouring of chesed that, as you, Mir Hashem, will discover, you didn't even know you possessed. I remember once one of my children had something like whooping cough or croup or something like that, and my wife and my mother had gone to shopping and left my father and myself with the children, and this child was crying and screaming, and it was terrible. And I picked up the child, and walking up and down with the child, and singing to the child, and I didn't feel, why do I have to do this? And boy, it's getting tiring. And will I get enough sleep tonight? And so, on the contrary, it's my child. My child's crying. My child's in pain. So, parents, being a parent, puts you in a position which calls forth an outpouring of loving kindness, and a person who has saras is excluded from the city and isolated. So now, that's the characteristic that these 4 have. It's 2 lacking resources and 2 lacking connection. And here, King David chose one of each category, chose the poor who lack resources, and the woman who has no children, probably because poverty is more common than blindness, and childlessness is more common than taras. So what is he saying now? He's saying that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is providing for these most needy people. But what does he do for them? Well, he takes the poor and puts them together with the philanthropists. That's not the obvious contrast. The obvious contrast would be if they're poor, put them together either with the rich or with those who are well off. What's it got to do with philanthropy? Well, what's the point of having money? What's the handicap in not having money? I said it before, 2.5 minutes ago. These people don't have the resources to do loving kindness. So the real problem in being poor is that you don't have the ability to do as much loving kindness as a person who has money to do it with. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing is providing the ability to do loving kindness. That's what he's doing. He's providing it for the poor person to become a philanthropist and providing it for the barren woman to have children to whom she can do the loving kindness. And that's a great, great gift, because what did the Gemara say? The Gemara said these four categories of people aren't fully alive because they don't have the normal resources of doing, opportunities and resources of doing loving kindness. They aren't fully alive. So by giving them the opportunity to loving kindness, he's giving them life. This is all Ramchal. Every last word of it is Ramchal. And that's based on the principle that doing loving kindness is giving life. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing all the time. The one principle that guides the whole of the creation and the whole of the management of the creation is loving kindness. In these two verses of King David, you have the whole story. You have the whole story right here. That plus the Gemara. Okay, listen, I hope that you have a wonderful Benes Manim, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Seder, and a wonderful Pesach, and looking forward to seeing you next month.